Alright, so for today's topic, we will be moving on to the digestive system, aka your alimentary canal. So I think almost all of us is already kind of familiar with the digestive system. Again, when we think about the digestive system, we would think about these long tubular structures which extends from the mouth area until the anus or the poop area. So food would enter here and eventually be digested and absorbed and excreted here. So through all of these regions, we would have different components, different layers of tissues, which would basically contain all of the four basic types of tissues that we have learned in VETA 105. Okay, so what is the basic structure of the digestive system? Again, what is our basic type? We have our parenchymatous and our tubular organ types, right? When we are talking about the alimentary canal, coming from the term canal, we are actually talking about the tubular part of the digestive system. In our next lecture, or the digestive system part 2, we will be talking mainly about the glands which support the digestive function of our digestive system. And those glands, on the other hand, would be parenchymatous in nature. But for today's lecture, we will be focusing on the alimentary tract or alimentary canal or GIT tract. Okay? So, canal, it means it's tubular because again, it has a lumen within the tube-like structure, right? So out of these three types of tubular organs, we have already discussed the blood vessel in the cardiovascular system. We have already discussed the trachea in the respiratory system. And finally, we are now here in the GIT system, and the example is the intestine, at least for this photo, okay? Okay, if you will need to master and understand one slide in the whole of the alimentary canal histology system, it is this slide, okay? Because this slide will tell us the general organization of the GIT, okay? So always remember that the GIT, no matter which segment it is almost always composed of these four layers, okay? So the four layers, the one nearest the lumen or the most inside layer would be your tunica mucosa, which is further subdivided into the epithelial layer, and then the lamina propria layer, and then the muscularis mucosa layer, or in some references, this is also called as your lamina mucosae. Okay? So all these three layers is collectively called as your tunica mucosa. And then depending on the organ system, sometimes, or depending on the GIT segment, the muscularis mucosa layer or the muscle layer of the tunica mucosa sometimes disappears or is sometimes very well developed. So later, let's talk more about that. Next, we would have your submucosa, which would usually contain your glands, no, as well as parts of your nervous system. Okay. Then we would have your muscularis propria or tunica muscularis. So this is the thickest muscle layer, and this is different from the thin muscle layer, which is a sub layer of your tunica mucosa. Okay, so the tunica muscularis is usually divided into the inner circular and then the outer longitudinally arranged muscle layer. And then in between them, usually you would have again a member of your nervous system, which is your mesenteric plexus. And finally, the outermost layer, you would have your tunica serosa or adventitia, depending on where the actual GIT segment is located. If it is located within a body cavity, such as your abdominal cavity or your peritoneal cavity, then the last layer will be called as your tunica serosa. So tunica serosa is actually a form of simple squamous lining epithelium, while your adventitia is actually composed of connective tissue. Okay? All right. So a schematic diagram of all these layers is here. So again, the inner layer is the mucosa, and the mucosa is composed of the epithelium, lamina propria, and the thin muscle layer, which is called as your muscularis mucosae. After that, the next layer would be your submucosa, which usually contains, again, your glands and the blood vessels, and sometimes your nervous plexuses. Okay? And then you would have your muscle layer here, your inner circularly oriented muscle fibers, and your outer longitudinally oriented muscle fibers. So if you cut it, you will see that in the outer longitudinal muscle fibers, you can see the cross section of your smooth muscles. And then in the inner circular, you will see the longitudinal section of your smooth muscles. Okay? And then finally, you would have your tunica serosa. So for the intestines, it's usually the serosa instead of your adventitia. For the adventitia, usually it would be your esophagus, which is located in the neck area, which would have your adventitia, or your end part of your rectum, which is not located in the body cavity and is embedded somewhere in your pelvic area. Okay? So what is the main function of our digestive system? Here we can see, there it is. We can see the lips, the teeth, the gums, the beaks, the tongue. These are also actually part of your digestive system. And they mainly function for the ingestion of the food, for acquiring of the food, and for the mechanical breakdown of the food. And then, after the mouth area, we would go to the actual GIT tract or tubular area. This is where we would have your chemical breakdown as well as the absorption of the food substances. So for the chemical breakdown, it would be usually, it will start a little bit in the mouth, and then eventually much of it would be in the stomach, and then absorption would happen mainly in the small intestine as well as in the large intestine. For the small intestine, it's usually the nutrients that is being absorbed, while for the large intestine, it's basically the reabsorption of the water, and the finally the expulsion of the indigestible portions as your poop. Finally, expulsion in the rectum and into the anal orifice. Okay? So another main characteristic of the digestive system, especially for the GIT tract or alimentary tract, is the use of foldings. Okay? Again, when we see a lot of foldings, it is to increase the surface area. So in order to maximize the surface area or the contact of the food into the with the elements of the digestive system, foldings or folds or pliques are usually employed in the digestive system. As you can see grossly, if we zoom out, we can see that the intestines are already folded. What else? If we go within the intestines, you would see the foldings or the pliques. And if you zoom in this pliques, you will see your villi, right? And in this villi, each cell would even have microvilli. Okay? So this series of multiple foldings is another key characteristic of the GIT or digestive system. So how does the digestive system develop? Basically, majority of the lining of the digestive system actually comes from this one, the ventral most germ layer, which is our endoderm, and is actually formed by the folding of the lateral folds and eventual formation of your mesenteries as well. Okay, then you would have your coelomic cavities. And these diagram shows the formation of the foregut, the midgut, and the hindgut. So these different primitive parts of the stomach will eventually give rise to the more specific areas of the GIT that we will discuss later. Okay? Depending on the species, further developments are needed depending on how their stomach looks like. For example, in the ruminant, there will be more formations of outpocketings of the stomach and as well as twistings. Again, in the ruminants, they are ruminants because they have the rumen, which actually is an enlarged non-glandular compartment of the stomach or the glandular stomach. Okay. And then development also deals with the twisting of the intestines. So as we said earlier, the intestines, in order to maximize the cavity, it employs a series of foldings, so and twistings as well. So here you will see that different segments of the intestines would need to twist and do a series of foldings in order to maximize the space within the abdominal cavity. And depending on the species, the different segments would develop differently and arrange themselves differently as well. So, for example, in carnivores, you would have technically shorter length of GIT, and then in the ruminants, the intestines is spiral, and then in the pig, it's spiral as well, but a little bit more chandelier-like or forming a cone-like structure. And then in the equine intestine, we would see that the one area, specifically your cecum, is very large since the horse eats grass, which is high in cellulose or plant materials, but it doesn't have a rumen, so the cecum compensates for that, as well as the colon. So it would have a very large and well-developed colon. So again, what we see is that the GIT differs very greatly among species. So you would have your carnivores, your omnivores, and then you would have your grass-eating herbivores, which would have more complicated stomachs because they would need to break down their food more before they can even start absorbing it. Thus, the presence of a very developed non-glandular part of the stomach, which the carnivores and omnivores lack. And then we will also have our horse, which also eats grass or high fiber diet, even though it doesn't have a non-glandular part. It's okay because the colon and the cecum is very large, so it compensates for that through the fermenting capabilities of these segments of the intestine. Then, of course, we have our avian species, which again would have a different type of stomach, which is more catered to eating grains and seeds of plants. Although some avian species are also carnivorous, so within this species, there are still a lot of species differences. Okay? Another schematic diagram of the differences in the length of each segment and the differences in the stomach. So here you can see that in the bovine, you would have your non-glandular areas and the glandular area. And for other animals, it's mostly just the glandular area. And then for the horse, you would see that the cecum is well developed as well as the colons, etc. Okay? So the digestive system is basically actually divided in the oral cavity and then the alimentary canal. The oral cavity is the most rostral or first part or first area of the digestive system, while the alimentary canal actually makes up the bulk of the digestive system. And we say digestive system, we usually think of the alimentary canal. Okay, first let's talk about the oral cavity. For the oral cavity, we have the lip, the cheeks, the teeth, the gingiva or the gums, the palate, and the tongue. And then within the tongue, we would have your structures, your small bumps on the surface of your tongue found in the epithelium. That would be your papilla, which is further subdivided into two types, your mechanical papilla and your gustatory papilla or papilla, which houses taste buds, which allows the animal to have a sense of taste or taste the food that they are eating. Under mechanical type of papilla, we have filiform, conical, and lenticular. Later, we're going to see what they look like. So these three types of tongue, papilla, or protrusions do not have taste buds, while your fungiform, foliate, and circumvallate papilla would have your taste buds. For the alimentary canal, we already know the parts of this. Of course, we would have your again, different types depending on the different species. And we will be using the carnivore as like the default animal. So anyway, these three species would have your pharynx, your esophagus, and your stomach. And for the stomach, the default is it is fully glandular. And this glandular stomach would have three subparts, okay? And then we have, of course, your small intestine and your large intestine. So for the stomach, the subpart, the one nearest the esophagus is your cardiac. Then you have fundic, and then your pyloric. So this part will be nearest the esophagus, and this part will be the one nearest to your small intestine. Okay? In ruminants, all of these three subparts is found in the abomasum. So the abomasum is the glandular stomach of the ruminant. But it would have non-glandular parts, which is made up of the rumen, reticulum, and the omasum. So the rumen, reticulum, and omasum is in order. The rumen is the one that is nearest the esophagus. So the food particles will go to the rumen, and then eventually the reticulum, and then in the omasum, before it finally reaches the glandular part, which is the abomasum. In avians, the glandular part is your proventriculus, while the muscular part is your ventriculus. So for most of you, you may have already eaten both of these, so later we will see their histological characteristics. And what else? In the avian species, we have your crop, which is basically an outpocketing of the avian esophagus. So for the intestine, again, you have your duodenum, jejunum, and your ileum. So this holds true for all the domestic species here. And then for the large intestine, it starts with the cecum, then you would have your colon, and then you would have your rectum, and then your anus or anal canal. For the avian species, you would have, again, something special wherein there will be a pair of cecum. Thus, in the avian, it's called ceca. And then finally, in the avian species, also you have your cloaca or the common opening of the urogenital system as well as the digestive system. So you would have your coprodium, which is the part which is directly connected to the rectum. Then the urideum, wherein the openings of your urogenital system both opens here, and the proctideum, which is the one nearest the outside environment. Okay, so let's talk about the lip and cheeks in the oral cavity. Okay, so for the lips and cheeks, basically, um, we have already encountered all of these parts when we're talking about the integumentary system. It has an outer part here and an inner part here. The outer part is this one. It is keratinized. It is lined by stratified squamous epithelium, actually both of them. The inside part, the mucous part, which is moist and hairless, it corresponds to this part. So both parts are actually stratified squamous epithelium, but only the outside part has hair and has a stratum corneum or keratinized layer. And the junction between the two of them in humans is called as your vermilion border. Vermilion is like an old archaic word for red. because this area in humans usually is colored red. This is also called as your mucocutaneous junction. And then inside the lip, in the submucosal area, you would have your um, muscle, skeletal muscle component. And that's the reason why you can actually control your lips when you're talking and when you're eating. And then you would also have the presence of your labial glands in the mucosal or inside surface of the lips. Yeah, this area is actually where humans would usually put their lipstick. Okay, so again, the outside area is dry and has a cornified layer and a relatively thinner layer of stratified squamous epithelium as compared with the oral mucosa in the inner layer, which doesn't have a cornified layer, doesn't have a keratin, so it is moist. Okay. For the teeth and the gingiva, so we will focus here. So for the teeth, actually, we have two basic types of teeth in the domestic species. We have our brachydont, brachy meaning short, and brachydont teeth actually stop growing after it has erupted, while we have our hypsodont type of teeth, which is continually growing. So usually carnivores will have this type of teeth, while your horses and ruminants will have this type of teeth. Although your pigs would have a combination of the two. Their incisors would be your brachydont, and then their tusks, which are continuously growing, would be actually your hypsodont type, no? So again, you would have different layers. Basic layers include your enamel, which is found in the crown area, and then the dentine, and then the pulp cavity, and then the counterpart of your enamel that is embedded in the jaw is actually your cementum. In the hypsodont, the cementum extends from the crown until the root. So it has, that's the another main difference between your brachydont and hypsodont teeth. Okay. So this is an unerupted tooth. We can already see the formation of our dentine here, as well as our enamel here and here. So the precursor cells of your dentine is your odontoblasts. So they're very thin, tall columnar cells, while the precursor cells or the cells which produce your enamel is termed as your ameloblasts. They are found in this layer, and they are also columnar cells. For the cementum, um, in some animals or animals that are usually in the wild, such as your deer and your bear, the number of layers of the cementum actually corresponds to the age of the animal. So, a layer of cementum is actually formed each year, and actually the thickness of the cementum can also give an idea on the nutritional or overall health of the animal. No? The thinner it is usually indicates that the animal underwent some form of unease or health problems, and thicker cementums would indicate that it was healthy during that time. So here, these are actually the bare teeth. So they would remove this and then embed it and then count the number of cementum layers in order to keep a record of the bears in the wild. So in other countries, they want to keep track of the age or species of their wild animals. So one way of doing that is through the collection of these small teeth. So they would tranquilize the animals, remove these small teeth, and then let them go. But of course, they would put an identifier or a tag in the animal, and then they can actually have an estimate of the animal's age. Okay, so here you can see the another example of these hypsodont tooth teeth developing. Okay. So you can see the enamel forming as well as the dentine. Next, let's talk about the palate. So for the palate, you actually have your soft palate as well as your hard palate. So your hard palate is hard because it has bone within it. And then usually your hard palate would also um, feature ridges. Okay? So here is the lip area, and this is the hard palate area. So this area, and this will be the soft palate area. The soft palate area would usually have muscle instead of your bone, and the lining epithelium of your palate will differ depending if it is near the oral cavity. If so, it would have your stratified squamous epithelium, and then if the palatine epithelium is the one facing the nasal cavity, then most likely it would have your respiratory um, epithelium. Okay, so here you can also see an uninterrupted tooth, which corresponds to this area. Again, the hard palate would also contain your ridges, and this is the palate is just a conduit or passageway for the food, and hard palate would can also feature palatine glands. Right? Again, stratified squamous epithelium. It can be cornified, or it can have a keratin layer for animals that are usually eating high in fiber food or high in cellulose food, such as your herbivores, basically plant materials. Okay. Then in the deeper layers, you would have your lamina propria, which is composed of dense connective tissue. Next, let's discuss the tongue. So for the tongue, basically the core of the tongue is your skeletal muscle. And again, we have already viewed the core of the tongue when we were studying the features of the skeletal muscle. You may have already eaten the skeletal muscle of the tongue if you enjoy lengua. So we have a Philippine dish, which is basically the tongue of your cow or ox tongue. Anyway, it's delicious because it's made of very fine fibers of your skeletal muscle in the deeper layers. And then, of course, you would have your lamina propria, which is your connective tissue. And finally, you would have your outer layer of stratified squamous epithelium. And then you can also have your lingual glands. If we zoom in inside, you can see that the orientation of the skeletal muscle fibers inside is there's is mixed. There's the longitudinal as well as the cross section um, skeletal muscle fibers. And in the surface area, you would see that there are again the protrusions that we have been talking about earlier, or the papillas. Again, these papillas is subdivided into two. We have our gustatory, taste bud containing papillas, and the mechanical papillas, which is mainly functioning for the grasping of food particles or plant material. Okay? So for the filiform, these are your filiform papilla. They are the most numerous. And filiform basically looks like um, hair or long strand-like papilla, and they do not contain any taste buds. And usually interspersed within your filiform papilla are your fungiform papilla. They look like button mushrooms, and this time around, this fungiform papilla contain taste buds. Okay, these are your fungiform papilla. So closer look, filiform and fungiform papilla. The taste buds of your fungiform papilla is usually seen in the ridge at the edge. Here, filiform papilla here, and your fungiform papilla. Filiform papilla and then fungiform papilla. Next, we have our circumvallate type of papilla. So this is your circumvallate papilla. This is one of the biggest type of papilla and usually found at the root or base of the tongue. This area, this area. So histologically, it looks like this, and this time around, we can clearly see the taste buds located in the valley. That's why it's called circumvallate, because there is a valley surrounding this papilla. Okay. So if we zoom in, these are your actual individual taste buds. So very microscopic. When I was younger, I thought the tongue papillas are already your taste buds, but actually, it was false, no? The taste buds are microscopic structures embedded within the epithelium of your tongue papilla, or specifically your gustatory papillae. So you will see that your taste buds actually contains your different types of cells, the dark cells and the light cells, and then the supporting cells or sustentacular cells as well. And then at the top part, this circular structure, this would be your taste pores. Finally, you would also have your conical papilla here, which is relatively larger and more plumpier than your filiform papilla. Okay, so these are your conical papilla. And then we have our lenticular papilla, this one, which looks like this in under the scanning electron microscope. They are called lenticular because they resemble lentils, or a type of bean. So that's why it's called lenticular. And then you have our foliate papilla, which is actually found in the side of the tongue, and foliate because it looks like leaves. This is your foliate papilla, and again, your taste buds here on the sides.